The night was quiet, too quiet. Sarah sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her eyes heavy with sleep. Her parents had left for the weekend, and she was alone in the house. At first, it felt like freedom. No rules, no one telling her to go to bed early. But as the hours passed, the silence in the house grew louder. The house was big, old, and filled with shadows that stretched long under the dim hallway light. The wind outside howled softly, making the trees tap against the window. Sarah pulled, her blanket tighter around her shoulders, and turned up the volume on her phone. Then she heard it. A soft creak. Her heart skipped a beat. She turned her head towards the hallway. The house was old. Old houses made noises. It was nothing, just the wood settling. She took a deep breath and forced herself to relax. But then, another creak. Closer this time. Her stomach twisted. She put her phone down and sat up straight. "Hello?" she called out, her voice small. No answer. Her mind raced. Maybe it was just her imagination, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then the TV screen flickered. For a second the image warped, and then static. The remote lay untouched beside her. Her fingers trembled as she grabbed it and pressed the power button. The screen went dark. She swallowed hard. Her own breath sounded too loud. Then from upstairs, footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She wasn't imagining it. Someone was in the house. Her phone. She reached for it with shaking hands and unlocked it. No service. The Wi-Fi was gone too. Her fingers hovered over the emergency dial, but before she could press it, another noise came. A whisper. Soft. Just above her ear. "Sarah." She screamed. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She ran to the front door, her hands fumbling with the lock. It wouldn't budge. It was stuck, like someone or something was holding it from the other side. Panic surged through her veins. She spun around, her eyes scanning the dark room, the kitchen. She could hide there. She sprinted. But as she reached the doorway, the overhead light flickered, then died. The darkness swallowed her. Then she felt it. A breath. Cold. Against the back of her neck. Terror rooted her to the spot. She wanted to run, to scream, but she couldn't move. Then a voice, deep, whispering, right in her ear. "You should not be alone." Sarah's legs finally obeyed. She stumbled forward, crashing into the counter. Her hand closed around a knife from the rack. She turned, swinging wildly into the dark. Nothing. The kitchen was empty. But then, footsteps. Behind her. She wasn't alone. Sarah's breath came in short, shaky gasps. The knife in her hand felt useless against something she couldn't see. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else, but the footsteps, they were real. Slow. Coming closer. She pressed herself against the cold kitchen counter, her fingers tightening around the knife. The darkness felt alive, shifting, around her. Then, silence. The footsteps stopped. Sarah's chest heaved as she tried to steady her breathing. She squinted, hoping her eyes would adjust to the darkness. But no matter how hard she tried, the kitchen remained an endless void. Then something moved in the corner. A shadow. It stretched unnaturally long against the floor, even though there was no light. Her blood ran cold. The shadow wasn't hers. A low, raspy whisper filled the air. "You let me in." Sarah's body turned. Ice. Her fingers went numb around the knife handle. Let it in? What did that mean? Her mind raced back to earlier that night. She had been watching horror videos, reading ghost stories, and the knocking. The knocking she had heard at the door. Hours ago. She had ignored it, thinking it was the wind. But what if... A sudden crash yanked her from her thoughts. The fridge door had swung open on its own, slamming against the counter. Sarah flinched, her grip on the knife tightening. The air turned, frigid, colder than she had ever felt. Her breath came out in visible puffs. Then the whisper returned. "Look behind you." No. She wouldn't. She couldn't. Her body refused to move, but she felt it. The presence. Right behind her. Close. Too close. A soft, icy breath brushed against her ear. And then, fingers. Cold, bony fingers grazing the back of her neck. Sarah screamed and spun, around slashing wildly with the knife. The blade cut through empty air. Nothing. The kitchen was empty. The silence was deafening. She backed away, her legs shaking. She needed to get out. Now. She turned towards the hallway leading to the front door, and froze. A figure stood at the end of the hall, tall, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its body cloaked in shadow like it wasn't entirely there. But the worst part was the eyes, glowing, watching, waiting. Sarah's stomach twisted, her legs refused to move. The figure raised a hand, its fingers long and jagged. It pointed at her. Then, the lights flickered back on, and the hallway was empty. Sarah didn't waste another second. She ran. She didn't care where, she just had to get away. She sprinted up the stairs, her breath ragged. Her room. She could lock the door, call for help, but as she reached the top step, she heard it again. A whisper. But this time, it was coming. From inside her room, something was already waiting for her. Sarah's body locked up as she stood outside her bedroom door. The whispering was coming from inside. She clutched the knife tighter, her palms slick with sweat. Her mind screamed at her to run, to get out of the house, but her body wouldn't listen. She had nowhere else to go. Taking a shaky breath, she pressed, her ear to the door. Silence. Maybe she was imagining it. Maybe the fear was messing with her head. But then, tap, tap, tap. Something scratched against the wood from inside. Her breath hitched. No, 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 no. That wasn't possible. She had locked her door before coming downstairs. Slowly, she reached for the handle. It was ice cold under her fingers. She turned it. The door creaked open. Darkness. Her room was pitch black. The air inside was heavy, suffocating. It smelled old, like damp wood and something rotten. She hesitated, then reached for the light switch. Her fingers trembled as she flicked it on. The bulb flickered once, twice, then died. Her stomach dropped. Then, from the darkness, something breathed. Sarah stumbled back, her heart hammering. She swung the knife in front of her blindly. "Who's there?" she choked out. Silence. Then, movement. A shift in the shadows. Sarah's eyes darted around the room, searching. She could barely make out the shapes of her bed, her desk, her closet. The closet door was open. Her heart stopped. She never left her closet open. The whispering started again. Low, raspy, curling through the air like smoke. Sarah took a shaky step back. Then another. She needed to get out. But before she could move, a single word drifted out from the closet. Sarah. Her blood turned to ice. She ran. She didn't think. She didn't breathe. She just ran, sprinting down the stairs 2 at a time. She could hear footsteps behind her, heavy, unnatural, chasing her. She reached the front door, yanking at the lock. It still wouldn't budge. Tears welled in her eyes. "No, no, please." A shadow loomed behind her. A cold hand gripped her shoulder. She screamed. And then, knock, knock, knock. Sarah's breath hitched. The front door. Someone was knocking. Slow. Rhythmic. 3 knocks. She spun around, her back pressed against the door. The room was empty. No shadow. No whispering. No cold fingers. Her body shook as she turned toward the peephole. A figure stood outside. Not a monster. Not a shadow. A man. Tall. Dressed in black. Face hidden by the porch light's glare. Knocking. Waiting. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps. She wasn't sure which terrified her more. The thing inside her house, or the thing waiting outside. Sarah's fingers trembled as they hovered over the doorknob. The knocking had stopped. She pressed her ear to the door, her heart hammering in her chest. Silence. Then, knock, knock, knock. She jumped back, choking on a scream. The man outside hadn't moved. He stood still, his head slightly tilted, his face still obscured by the porch light's glare. Sarah's body shook as she slowly reached for the peephole, her eye pressed against the glass. The porch was empty. Her stomach twisted. No, she had just seen him. He had been standing right there. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she stepped back from the door. Her mind screamed at her to leave, to run, to do something. Then, from behind her, tap, tap, tap. The sound of fingernails against glass. Sarah's blood ran cold. Slowly she turned. The living room window. The man was there, standing outside, his hand pressed against the glass. But something was wrong. His face. Sarah's stomach lurched. He had no eyes. Just empty sockets, dark and endless, staring straight at her. Then his mouth moved. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see his lips forming them. "Let me in." Sarah stumbled backward, her knees nearly giving out. She turned to run. Then the lights flickered. The whole house buzzed with static energy. The air, thick like a storm, was about to break. The TV turned on by itself, the screen filled with white noise. Then, voices, whispering, from everywhere. Sarah clamped her hands over her ears, her breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing it all to go away. Then, silence. When she opened her eyes, the room was still. The TV was off. The lights were steady, and the man at the window was gone. Sarah's chest rose and fell rapidly. Was it over? Had she imagined it? Her mind screamed at her to leave the house now. Then, from behind her, just inches away, a whisper. "I'm already inside." Sarah didn't have time to scream before the darkness swallowed her whole. Darkness. Thick. Suffocating. Sarah tried to scream, but no sound came out. The air around her was heavy, pressing against her like invisible hands. Her body refused to move. Then, the whisper returned. Closer. Colder. "You let me in." A breath against her ear. Fingers brushing her arm. Sarah's body jolted back into action. She ran. Blindly, desperately, she bolted through the house, slamming into walls, knocking over furniture. She didn't know where she was going. She just needed to escape. The front door. Her hands fumbled with the lock. It was stuck, but she didn't stop. She yanked, twisted, begged. A hand grabbed her wrist. Ice cold. Inhuman. Sarah screamed, kicking, thrashing, but the grip only tightened. The whispering filled the air, surrounding her, inside her head, inside her bones. Then bang, 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 loud, sharp. The front door shook violently as something pounded against it. Sarah's breath caught. Was it the man from the window or something worse? The whispering stopped. The grip on her wrist vanished. For a second, there was nothing but silence. Then, click. The front door unlocked itself. Sarah didn't hesitate. She yanked it open and ran, out into the night, into the freezing air, down the empty street. She didn't stop running, didn't look back. Only when she reached the neighbor's porch did she collapse, gasping for air. The house behind her stood silent. Dark. Nothing moved inside. No shadows, no whispers, no man at the window, just an empty house, a normal house, except for one thing. The front door, it was still open, and inside, just beyond the threshold, a shadow, watching, waiting. Sarah turned and never looked back. She never went home again, but sometimes, late at night, she still hears it, the whisper. "You let me in." Story 2. Daniel had lived in the house for 3 months before he noticed the door. It was a normal evening. Quiet, routine. He was walking down the hallway, heading to his bedroom, when his eyes flickered to the right. And there it was. A door. Door that had never been there before. His footsteps slowed. His stomach twisted in confusion. He had walked down this hallway 100 times. There had always been just two doors, his room and the bathroom. But now there was a third. Daniel swallowed hard and stepped closer. The door was old, the paint peeling, the wood cracked. There was no handle, just a keyhole. A strange feeling crept over him, like something on the other side was waiting. The air around him felt heavy, thick with something unseen. His fingers twitched as he reached out. A loud knock echoed from inside the door. Daniel jumped back. His breath came fast and shallow. His pulse hammered in his ears. That wasn't possible. There was no room there. There had never been a room there. And yet, something inside had knocked back. His throat went dry. He turned, moving fast, practically running into his bedroom and slamming the door shut behind him. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening. The house was silent. But just as sleep started to pull him under, he heard it, a slow, dragging sound, like fingernails running across wood, coming from the other side of the door. Daniel's eyes snapped open. The sound was real. Scratch, scratch, scratch. His breath hitched. It was coming from the hallway, from the door that wasn't there before. He lay frozen in bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. The scratching was slow, deliberate, like whatever was behind that door knew he was listening. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. It's not real. It can't be real. Maybe he was dreaming. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. Then the scratching stopped. Silence. The air in the room felt colder now. Heavy. Daniel forced himself to sit up, his body stiff with fear. He listened. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the house. Maybe it was just knock. His body jerked. The sound was soft. Just once. A single knock from the hallway. Daniel's throat went dry. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then knock, knock. Second and third, slow and rhythmic. His stomach twisted. Someone, or something, was at the door. He couldn't take it anymore. He had to see. He had to know. His feet hit the floor. Slowly, cautiously, he crept towards his bedroom door. His fingers trembled as he gripped the handle. He took a deep breath and opened it. The hallway was empty. Daniel's eyes darted to the far end. The new door was still there. Still old, still cracked, and still waiting. His whole body screamed for him to shut the door, go back to bed, forget it ever happened. But he couldn't. Something about that door pulled him in. Slowly, step by step, he moved toward it. The wooden surface looked wrong up close. The cracks in the paint seemed to shift like they were forming shapes, letters, words. Daniel blinked. The words were moving, rearranging. A new message appeared, etched into the wood. Let me out. His blood ran cold. Then, the keyhole moved. Not the door. Not the handle. Just the keyhole. It twitched, the edges stretching, twisting like it was breathing. Daniel stumbled back. His heart slammed against his chest. This wasn't normal. This wasn't real. He needed to... The keyhole blinked. A single yellow eye stared back at him. Daniel choked on a scream. Then, the door shuddered. Something on the other side was pushing. Against it. Hard. And it was trying to get out. Daniel ran. His body moved before his mind could catch up. He sprinted back to his room, slamming the door shut behind him. His hands fumbled for the lock, twisting it so hard his fingers ached. His chest rose and fell in rapid gasps. His ears strained, listening. Silence. For a moment he thought, hoped. It was over then. Knock, knock, knock. His stomach twisted. It wasn't coming from the hallway anymore. It was coming from inside his room. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His body refused to turn, refused to look, but he could feel it. Something was here, behind him. Slowly he turned his head. His closet door was open. Just an inch. That wasn't right. He never left it open. The darkness inside was too deep, too empty. like it stretched further than it should. Then from the shadows, a hand, long, pale, fingers too sharp, too thin, slowly curling around the edge of the closet door. Daniel's legs refused to move. The hand gripped the door tighter, pulled. The closet door creaked open wider. And then, a whisper. "You saw me." The voice was inside his head, crawling through his mind like cold fingers pressing against his brain. The closet door creaked open all the way. Daniel finally screamed. He turned, yanking the bedroom door open, running out, into the hallway. His bare feet pounded against the wooden floor as he sprinted toward the front door, but as he reached for the handle, the lights flickered, the whole house buzzed, the air thick with something unseen. The shadows along the walls moved, stretching, twisting, growing. Then the whispers came. Not just one voice. Hundreds. Daniel clamped his hands over his ears, squeezing his eyes shut. He let us see him. Now he must let us in. Let us in, Daniel. His pulse thundered in his skull. Then, a cold hand grabbed his shoulder. His eyes snapped open. He turned and saw it. Not a person. Not a ghost. Something worse. Tall. Too tall. Bones bending the wrong way. Skin stretched tight over a grinning skull. Its body flickered like it wasn't completely here. But the eyes, the same yellow eye from the keyhole. It stared at him, through him. Then, it whispered, "Let me out." Daniel didn't move, didn't breathe. The thing's grin widened. Then, the lights went out, and Daniel was never seen again. Story 3. The first time Mia heard it, she thought it was just the house settling, a soft scraping sound coming from inside the air vent above her bed. It was late. She was tired. She ignored it. But the next night, it happened again. Scrape, scrape, slow, careful, like something inside was moving. Mia's stomach twisted. Maybe it was a rat, or a bird that got stuck. She grabbed her phone and shined the flashlight up at the vent. The slits in the metal cover were too small to see through, but as she stared, the sound stopped. Silence. Then, a whisper. "I see you." Mia's blood ran cold, her breath hitched. She sat up fast, her pulse hammering in her ears. That wasn't possible. That wasn't real. The air vent was empty. It had to be. But then, a single finger slipped through the vent slats. Long, thin, blackened. Mia screamed. She scrambled off the bed, nearly tripping as she bolted out of her room. Her hands trembled as she reached for the hallway light switch, but when she flipped it on, the lights flickered. The air turned heavy, wrong, and from inside the vent, a soft, wheezing laugh. Something was in her house. And it wasn't stuck. It was hiding. Mia's hands trembled as she backed away from her bedroom door. The laugh, that horrible wheezing laugh, echoed from the vent. It wasn't human. It wasn't normal. It knew she had seen it. Her breath came in short gasps. She forced herself to move, stepping slowly into the hallway. The house was dark, the air thick, suffocating. She needed to get out. Now. Then, thump. Something moved inside the walls. Mia's stomach twisted. It wasn't just in the vent above her bed. It was crawling through the air ducts, and it was fast. The noise raced along the ceiling, shifting from one vent to another. It was tracking her. Mia sprinted for the front door. Her fingers fumbled with the lock, twisting, pulling, click. It wouldn't open. The door wasn't stuck, it was locked from the inside. Mia's breath hitched. She turned back, her eyes darting around the shadows. Then, the ceiling vent above her rattled. Slowly, she looked up. The metal slats were bent outward. Something had been pushing against them. Then, two long fingers curled through the openings. Mia's chest tightened. Her body screamed at her to run, but she was frozen. A face appeared behind the vent. Not a human face. It was stretched, pale, grinning. the skin too tight over its skull, the mouth too wide, its teeth jagged and broken like it had been chewing on something hard or someone. And then it spoke. "You left your window open." Mia's heart stopped. Her window. She hadn't checked it. Then, a cold breath brushed against the back of her neck. Something was behind her. She wasn't alone. Mia's body locked up. The breath against her neck was real cold, rotten. She wanted to run, but she couldn't move. Her body refused. Every muscle in her leg screamed, but they stayed frozen. Then, fingernails, sharp, slow, dragging across her shoulder. Her stomach twisted. Her breath hitched. The thing in the vent was still watching. But now, there was another one. Behind her. Mia squeezed her eyes shut. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. Then, a voice, right in her ear. Run. Her body finally obeyed. Mia screamed and bolted, nearly falling over herself as she sprinted down the hallway. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The vents above her shook violently like something was slamming against them, crawling through the air ducts at impossible speed. She reached the living room. Her hands fumbled with the window latch, yanking, pulling, a thud, loud. Right behind her, something landed on the floor. It had come out of the vent. Mia didn't think. She threw herself out the window, crashing onto the porch outside. Pain shot through her side, but she didn't stop. She scrambled to her feet and ran, barefoot, breathless, into the street. The house loomed behind her, silent, dark, no sign of movement. But Mia knew. She knew something was inside. She knew it had been watching her for days. She knew it had finally come down. And worst of all, she knew it wasn't alone. Because as she stood there, gasping, heart pounding, she saw something, shifting in the vents of the house across the street, and another window slowly creaking open. Story 4. Lena hated working late. She glanced at the time on her phone, 11:47 p.m., way too late to still be in the office. But her boss had dumped last-minute paperwork on her, and now she was the only one left in the entire building. She sighed, packing up her things. The office was dead silent, the hum of the ceiling lights the only sound. She grabbed her coat and hurried toward the elevator. The moment the doors slid open, a strange feeling crept over her. The elevator was too dark. Something about the way the dim light flickered made her stomach twist. But she shook the thought away and stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. The doors closed. The elevator shuddered before descending. Lena leaned against the railing, scrolling through her phone. The floors ticked by on the screen. 7, 6, 5. Then, the elevator stopped. The lights flickered. Lena frowned. She glanced at the buttons. She was on floor 3. But that didn't make sense. There was no third floor. The building only had 2. A cold chill crawled down her spine. The air inside the elevator suddenly felt wrong, thicker, heavier. Then, the doors slid open. Lena's stomach twisted. The hallway beyond was dark, longer than it should be. And at the very end, a single open door. The room inside was pitch black. Lena's breathing turned shallow. Something was in there watching her. Then from the darkness, footsteps, slow, coming toward her. The elevator shuddered violently. The doors twitched like they were trying to close, but something was stopping them. Then a voice. Soft. Wrong. Come down. You're on the wrong floor. Lena's entire body locked up. The footsteps sped up. She slammed the close button, punching it, over and over and over. The doors wouldn't move. The footsteps were almost there. Then, a hand. Pale. Wrong. Too many fingers. Reaching toward her from the darkness. The elevator lights flickered wildly. Then, suddenly, the doors snapped shut. The elevator dropped. Lena collapsed against the wall, her entire body shaking. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she gasped for air. Then, the elevator stopped again. The doors slowly slid open. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She was in the same hallway, still on the wrong floor. And this time, the door at the end was wide open. Lena's stomach twisted into a tight knot. She was still here, still on the wrong floor. The air in the hallway felt thicker now, pressing against her skin. The overhead lights flickered weakly, casting long, shifting shadows along the walls, and the door at the end, it was wide open. The darkness inside seemed alive. It stretched out like it was waiting for her. Then, the elevator doors twitched, not closing, not opening, just stuck. Lena jabbed the button for the ground floor over and over and over. Nothing happened. Then, a sound. Click, 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 like fingernails tapping against glass. Lena's breath hitched. Slowly, her eyes darted to the reflective elevator panel beside her. The hallway was empty, but in the reflection, a figure stood in the doorway. Lena's blood turned to ice. It was tall, too tall, its limbs stretching in the wrong proportions. Its head was tilted as if watching her, but the worst part, it had no face, only black hollow indentations where its eyes should be, and it was grinning. Lena's legs finally obeyed. She spun toward the hallway. Empty. Nothing was there. But in the reflection, it was closer. Lena slammed the buttons. Come on, come on, come on. The overhead light in the elevator snapped off. The doors started to close. Relief flooded her chest, until something stepped between them. A hand, thin, stretched, fingertips scraping against the metal. The doors jammed open, and a voice. Soft. Wrong. You're not supposed to be here, Lena screamed. She threw herself against the far wall of the elevator as the thing stepped inside. The lights flickered violently. Then, darkness, and a single whisper. Now you belong here too. Lena's world went black. For a second, there was nothing. No sound, no light. Just the thick, suffocating feeling of emptiness. Then, bzzzt, the elevator lights flickered weakly, bathing the space in a dim, sickly yellow glow. Lena pressed herself against the cold metal wall, her body trembling. The thing was inside with her. She could feel it. The air was colder now, heavy with the scent of something rotting. She didn't want to look. She couldn't, but her body betrayed her. Slowly, her eyes flickered to the side. The reflection in the elevator panel was wrong. The thing stood right next to her, its long fingers twitching. Its neck was twisted at an unnatural angle, its hollow eye socket staring directly at her, and it was still grinning. Then, it moved. Not like a person. Not like anything human. Its head snapped toward her in one sharp, jerky motion. Its body twitched, as if it was struggling to stay in shape. Lena choked back a sob. The elevator shuddered. The buttons on the panel flickered, every floor button lighting up at once. Then, the thing spoke. But its mouth didn't move. The voice came from everywhere. At once. You shouldn't have come here. Lena's breath hitched. The thing lurched forward, she screamed. Her fingers slammed against the emergency button. The elevator dropped. Faster, faster. Lena's stomach flipped. Her body lifted off the floor, weightless, as the elevator plummeted. The lights flickered violently. The walls stretched. The reflection in the metal panel twisted, warping, smiling. The thing didn't fall. It floated, gliding toward her as the elevator plunged into nothingness. Lena squeezed her eyes shut. Wake up, wake up, wake up. Then, silence. No impact. No crash. Just stillness. Lena's body hit the floor. The lights flickered once. Then, ding, the elevator doors slid open. Lena gasped, her body shaking, her head spinning. She crawled forward, desperate to escape. She stumbled out onto the floor and froze. This wasn't the ground floor. It wasn't any floor. The hallway stretched on forever. The walls were wrong, shifting, pulsing, breathing. Doors lined the endless hallway, each one slightly open, and from inside them, eyes, dozens, hundreds, watching her. Then, a whisper. "Welcome home." And the elevator doors slammed shut behind her.